Welcome to part 7 of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to talk about resistance to liberalism. Liberalism took some time to have its effects on politics and society, and when it did, it was mostly the classical liberalism, not the utilitarianism, right? And it was mostly in industrialized Western Europe, like Britain and France, right? In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, Britain had maintained many aspects or attributes of the old Ancien regime, at least in some respects. Like, for example, King George III was still the King of England. King George III was the last of the British monarchs who actually did influence Parliament. But by 1811, he'd pretty much gone insane. The period of 1815 to 1820 was one of economic depression. Middle and working classes began to agitate. You had government repression, right, in an attempt to maintain the status quo. Okay, this was all driven by the end of the Napoleonic Wars. 1815 rolls around, and the conservative government over Lord Liverpool had the expectation that there was going to be an economic boom in Britain. You'd have all these European markets now opened up to British goods with the end of Napoleon and the end of the war. However, in Europe, these countries in Europe were so devastated they couldn't afford British products. Okay, you mark that with a series of some bad harvests. You have the Luddite riots. You have a middle class demanding the vote. Right, you have a recipe for disaster. Now, Lord Liverpool responded by protecting the aristocratic landowners, right? He began imposing a series of high tariffs on foreign grains. These are known as the Corn Laws. Corn in this case is actually referencing wheat, okay? In 1819, there'll be a rally of middle-class families and workers that were calling for political reform at a place called St. Peter's Field, right? This is outside of Manchester. This rally will be run down by British cavalry. This becomes known as the Peterloo Massacre, right? That same year, Parliament is going to pass a notorious set of acts called the Six Acts, which is going to further try and put down this liberalism movement in Great Britain. The Six Acts are going to restrict rights to publicly assemble. It's going to allow houses to be searched for seditious or blasphemous pamphlets. It's going to permit for the imprisonment of authors of any such pamphlets. It's going to place high taxes on cheap newspapers to keep them, the more radical newspapers, out of the hands of the illiterate workforce, right? It's going to be a truly oppressive set of laws. By 1820, though, a new generation of British politicians began to take power, right? And these politicians had been raised with classical liberalism and utilitarianism, and they began to launch reforms designed to wipe away some of the old irrational, oppressive measures, the last remnants of the Ancien regime, right? The most important of these was the Great Reform Act of 1832. This gave seats in the House of Commons, the lower house, to these new industrial towns. It lowered property requirements for voting, therefore expanding male suffrage to include all middle-class men. Now, during this time period and into the 1830s and through the 1840s, there was also worker agitation towards creating a national charter, which would have guaranteed their rights to vote as well, and would have served as England's own first written constitution. But this charter will be voted down in Parliament repeatedly. It's going to take most of the 19th century to persuade the British middle class that the working class also deserved the vote. And it's going to be longer still before some of the ideas of John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism will be actually fully embraced.